After going back and forth on multiple prehistory topics, from the Cambrian creepy crawly Atoia to the scary shark-like fish Adestus, I finally picked out a topic to cover. You're on the money, Spino. We are going to talk about 5 different and unique crocodiles from the Pleistocene. The weird, the scary, and the unique oddballs. Mostly the big and scary, as it turns out. Crocodiles and their relatives have been some of the most powerful and dangerous carnivores on this planet since before the dinosaurs vanished. And their ancestors go back even further. Some of those really old ones look outright alien compared to modern crocodiles. And today, we are going to look at some of the crocs that existed in a not so ancient and often overlooked time in prehistory, and at some of the most overlooked crocodile species as well. So thank you all for watching, it means the most, and let's get right into it. Crocodylus thorbjarnarsoni was a large crocodile species from Kenya that appeared before the Pleistocene but lasted well into it. As the section title suggests, it might very well have been larger than the saltwater crocodile. In fact, it could very well claim the title as the largest true crocodile ever. The largest fossilized skull of this animal that has been found suggests that it might have grown up to 25 feet long, if not more. Now, unlike its relative, Crocodylus anthropophagus that we met in the previous Pleistocene video, there is no direct evidence this one preyed on human ancestors or early hominids. But given its size, it might very well have found our ancestors to be a tasty afternoon treat. And given the fact that the largest crocodile on Earth today, and some of the smaller ones too, have no issues munching on a human, I'm sure this giant one would too if you walked up and poked it right on the snoot. One theory about why this crocodile has no evidence for preying upon hominids, such as marks on bones of hominids, is the frightening theory that this crocodile was just so big compared to early hominids that it just gulped down smaller hominids whole, in one swallow. It was definitely large enough to pull this off, and I can tell that from a perfectly safe distance. I'm not going to get close enough to test that theory in the field. No, thank you. However, there is another theory about why there are no signs that this crocodile ate hominids, and it's that most of the time they were simply able to avoid this huge crocodile due to just how big it was. Its size meant that they could see it perhaps easier than they could Anthropophagus, whose name literally means human eater. And you know, considering that those hominids would have been smaller than us today, this crocodile would have appeared even more intimidating to them and just more giant than it would even to us, and that's just all the more reason to avoid it. Imagine seeing this animal alive from their perspective. You would run the other way too. This crocodile had a very broad snout. It's almost shovel-shaped, actually. Almost. And the species is known from 9 fossilized specimens, specifically 9 fossilized skulls, which are housed in the National Museum of Kenya. The holotype was a lower jaw and nearly complete skull known as KNMER 1683, and was dated to be about 2 million years old. Other skulls give us more of a glimpse into the animal's time range. The oldest skull is KNMLT 421, and it is dated to be between 4.2 and 5 million years old. This skull was originally assigned to a different species before it was reassigned to thorbjarnarsoni. As of now, thorbjarnarsoni is the only known species of its genus. Anthropophagus is actually part of a different genus, but it is a closely related one. So, with the animal's range it lived in mind, along with its size, this animal would have been a terror to early humans and our ancestors for millions of years. And I can guarantee many perished in its jaws. Horrific ends met in the prehistoric jungles of Kenya many millions of years ago. And maybe it could have even left such an impact that buried deep within us today somewhere is still a built-in fear of an animal we will never even see. Euthecodon. Now for one of the weirder ones in this video. This is a genus of super long-snouted mega crocodile that lived in Africa during the Miocene. This is actually one that appeared before, but had species survive into and go extinct during the Pleistocene, lasting as a whole from 20 million years ago to just around 1 million years ago. Yes, Spino, it still counts as a Pleistocene crocodile. This one was a standout compared to the other crocodiles of the time, and there are certainly not many faces like it nowadays. It looks a lot like the still living gharial, but its closest living relatives don't really resemble it at all, with Osteolamius having a really short snout and Mestistops having a longer one, but what look more like vampire fangs at the end of it. Don't poke any of these crocodiles on the snoot. I'm sure they'll take a bite as payment for sure. Yes, Spino, don't test in the field. Euthecodon coexisted with many crocodiles, but its long snout was a trait that it developed independently from other crocodiles, and it likely evolved such a trait for feeding on fish. Viewed from above, the skull and snout have saw-like shapes in them. You can see that in the picture on screen. Each tooth that sat in that long snout sat in its own individual bony sheath, separated from the next tooth by a constriction of rostrum. This is actually what results in that saw shape you see in the snout. Each tooth is slender and well suited for a piscivorous diet. Tooth count also varies between the three species in the genus, the smallest having up to 20, and the larger having almost 30. Now, as I just hinted, there are 3 species in this genus, and it is actually thought to be one of the largest of all Cenozoic crocodiles. By the way, the Cenozoic is still ongoing, so just let that sink in. It was the largest of the early Pleistocene, so ain't that nice. As you can see, its length rivaled some of the largest and much better known prehistoric crocodiles. Some estimates not only suggest that Euthecodon was one of the largest Cenozoic crocodiles, but was also one of the largest pseudosuchians. One of the fossil specimens we have of this genus found in the Turkana Basin was 33 feet in length. The skull alone was 5 feet. Older individuals also develop what are known as squamosal ridges or horns on their skulls as well. Now on to a little bit about each of the 3 known species. Here are the names on screen. I'm going to abbreviate them so I don't horrifyingly butcher them like they used to butcher fish with those slender teeth. The first, EA, has had remains found in Miocene-era rock from Libya and Egypt, meaning these guys once likely prowled the Nile like modern Nile crocodiles do. This was the earliest of the 3 species, and it is distinguished by its shortened snout and its wider skull, as well as the presence of 5 premaxillary teeth. The second species, EB, was one that appeared before but actually lasted into the Pleistocene in Ethiopia. But more fossils were found later at other locations across East Africa. However, it is possible that this might be a synonym species of the third Euthecodon species, or even some fossil material belonging to an unnamed 4th species of the genus. The third species is EN. Its fossils from the Miocene and Pliocene were also found in Egypt. It is believed that this species did not last into the Pleistocene, but rather was found in the early Miocene. It was abundant in northern Africa, but no fossils of this entire genus have ever been found outside of Africa. Crocodile species that the genus coexisted with have been found across the Mediterranean, but it seems that Euthecodon itself never ventured so far and wide. As I said, this crocodile genus went extinct during the Pleistocene, but what about its actual life? It's thought that with its similar appearance to modern gharials, it inhabited a similar niche, but not exactly the same. In fact, extinct gharials actually coexisted with EB, and both did live on a diet of small fish. Here you see modern gharials basking alongside a mugger crocodile. Look at their snout shape. While this is a case of convergent evolution, the appearance is similar, so you can take a moment to look at the similarities. Their teeth form an interlocking cage for fish. In North Africa, the species EA also coexisted and competed with other crocodiles, including Rimasuchus, but this was not one that lasted into the Pleistocene, and it is theorized that it wasn't one of these competitor crocodiles that actually caused this genus to finally go extinct. Remember that this was a specialized genus. Euthecodon was definitely a very specialized animal for a very specific way of life. And many other crocodiles are more generalists. What happens to specialists in nature when the world changes? We've talked about it before, and this crocodile was not an exception to the rule. It is theorized that when aridification increased, along with salinity and overall conditions favoring more temporary bodies of water, that it all combined to make the specified Euthecodon disappear, while more generalist crocodiles, like the Nile crocodile, handled the change just fine and were able to still sustain themselves. Either way, no matter what caused their extinction, this ancient crocodile species did not survive past the Pleistocene. Now, it's time for another one of the scary ones. Paludirex, our next crocodile, is one that was a semi-aquatic hunter that was very robust and grew up to 16 feet long. Also, it was the top predator of Australia's waterways in its day. Yep, before saltwater crocodiles took that title, these guys held the position as top predator of Australia's waterways. Yep, Spino, take a look at it. The history of this one's fossils being found began when Charles Walter Davis described the genus in 1886 based on the remains that had been found in 1860. However, the animal was only ever officially named Paludirex in that cursed year of 2020. Up to then, it was known under its historic name and by the fact that it was a huge freshwater crocodile that existed a mere 40,000 years ago. The historic name was Paludirex, and it was described based on skull remains and osteoderms. None of the individuals in Davis's collection were from the same individual, but actually, all were from different species entirely, and one bone even belonged to a crocodile from a whole different genus. The name Davis ended up going with, Paludirex, was only named, quote, out of convenience. And while his specimens were among the earliest fossilized crocodiles to ever be described in Australia, he did admit that he was not familiar with the fossil record when it came to Cenozoic crocodilians, and since he couldn't place his fossils in a known genus, that's where the name he used came from. The name did see widespread use for the next roughly 150 years, though, and when more crocodilian material was discovered across Australia, they sometimes, even oftentimes, were simply assigned to the name Paludirex. So as I said, Paludirex was only named in 2020. And that was a whole lot of backstory on the crocodile's fossils, but we're going to get to the actual animal soon. I just want to cover a little bit more about the history of its fossils and study first. Throughout the 2000s, only occasional studies on Paludirex were published, but finally, a new study reassessed fossilized material that had been assigned to Paludirex, and the result of this extensive work was the naming of Paludirex. As study continued, two species were named, Paludirex vincenti in 2020, and Paludirex gracilis, which had actually been named in 1997 under the Paludirex name. So, our big scary apex predator crocodile now has its new name, which translates to something very appropriate for the top predator of the waterways, Swamp King, or ruler of all swamps. I wouldn't want to venture into the swamps of Australia nowadays anyway, with saltwater crocodiles being around and a slew of other things that want to kill you. But I definitely wouldn't want to do it when the Swamp King was living there either. This crocodile was huge, and of the two species, P. gracilis was the smaller one. Remember the image I had on screen earlier in this section? And it is known from material dating to the late Pleistocene, an unofficial age of the Pleistocene, which is generally defined as having lasted from 129,000 years ago to 11,700 years ago, which is when the Holocene epoch began. The second species was the larger of the two, P. vincenti. It was not only larger, but also more robust. It lived also in the Pleistocene. Both species, though, have very few remains associated or described to them, And some remains we have might actually belong to an unknown third species. So what we're dealing with are very fragmentary remains from the two species, possibly from three species, to get an idea of this crocodile from paleontology in a nutshell. More study does need to be done on what we have, and more needs to be found to get a more complete picture into the Swamp King's way of life, aside from it being a huge crocodile that would eat you. Speaking of its diet, let's talk about the unfortunate critters that were sucked into and crushed in its hungry jaws, as well as the paleobiology of the animal. Oh, be quiet, Spino. I know it's all empty threats from you. This crocodile was large, as I've indicated many times now, but I really got to get the point across. This crocodile was big, and it actually was likely only semi-aquatic as well. It has all the hallmarks of being a semi-aquatic ambush predator with a flat skull and upward pointed nostrils and a uniquely proportioned skull. It was also very wide on both species, the skull was. It actually had one of the largest skulls among the Mikosuchid clade, with the type specimen measuring 26 inches long, telling us that, again, for the probably 100th time in this video now, this was a large crocodile, and it grew up to 16 feet long, about the same size as modern saltwater crocodiles. Now, the smaller of the two species grew up to be only around 13 feet. I say 13 as if that's any better. Its snout was also shallower on this species when compared to the larger species. One of the animals that we know met unfortunate ends inside the jaws of these two crocodile species were the giant kangaroos that you could find in the time at Australia. The croc would lunge out of the water for them, as well as for the other large megafauna you can find in Australia at this time. If this thing could get something into its mouth, it would drown and eat it. Being only semi-aquatic also set it apart from other crocodiles that lived in Australia at this time. Other animals that Paludirex ate included various large mammals and fish, and maybe smaller reptiles too. How it coexisted with saltwater crocodiles is a little less clear when compared to how it coexisted with fully terrestrial crocs, or even the narrow-snouted freshwater crocodile. Other animals that this crocodile genus might have shared its world with included the relative of today's false gharial, an animal with the name of all names. I'm just going to put it on screen. Yep. Not even going to try to say it. But if those two coexisted at all is also a bit dubious. So, how did the Swamp King become dethroned into extinction? The extinction of Paludirex is poorly understood. It was the last of its clade that existed on the Australian continent, and it's curious that it vanished when other large crocodiles were just fine. Like saltwater crocodiles, but that one is more of a generalist, not a specialist. It is theorized that this crocodile's main source of food was actually the megafauna. When they vanished, it seems like this one vanished around the same time too. There was also climate change, which turned Australia more arid, and compared with possible pressure from early human settlers and the more generalist saltwater crocodile, it just might have all combined to push the Swamp King from its throne and into extinction, and let the saltwater crocodile take its spot as the top predator of Australia's waterways from its cold, dead claws. Sounds like something a saltwater crocodile would do, honestly. This is one that appeared in the Pleistocene, but is still around, if critically endangered. The Cuban crocodile is a still living remnant of the Pleistocene. Living in Cuba, I know, shocking, I would have guessed it lived in Siberia too. This is a small crocodile. It only grows up to be about 6 to 7.5 feet long, with the largest males getting larger at about 11 feet. Now, don't let it being smaller confuse you with it being cute and cuddly, unlike the adorable Anatosuchus. This crocodile is vicious, highly aggressive, and territorial. And with its strong legs, it is the closest thing we have today to a fully terrestrial crocodile. It's not, but it's the closest thing left on Earth that is. And these guys can run fast. I've seen videos of these crocs sprinting at someone before, and it's terrifying. I would hate to have to run from one of these. The Cuban crocodile is of interest to biologists for these physical and behavioral traits, many of which are not seen in other crocodiles on Earth today. It's even been observed to partake in pack hunting behavior, which, that's terrifying. Awesome, though. The Cuban crocodile prefers freshwater and brackish water environments, which is just water with more salinity than you find in most freshwater. This means it can often be found in areas like mangrove swamps, coastal lagoons, marshes, floodplains, and river deltas. Due to it being more terrestrial than most crocodiles, it has less webbing between its toes when compared to other crocodiles today. In these environments it calls home, this living remnant of the Pleistocene feeds on fish, turtles, mammals, some of which it'll snatch right from low-hanging branches before they know what's hitting them. It also eats young invertebrates, crustaceans, arthropods, young members of its own species, and can even be a danger to humans with how aggressive they can be. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, it is listed as critically endangered today. This New World crocodile once had a far greater range than it does now. Fossils have been found in the Bahamas, Hispaniola, specifically in the Dominican Republic, as well as Cayman Islands, and a few other places. The family tree of this genus likely branched off from other close Crocodylus relatives sometime around 25 million years ago. And in all that time, though the Homo genus has only been around for a small fraction of it, there has only ever been one known fatal attack on a human, and it occurred in 1995. But still, the idea of being chased by a pack of these scares me. There would be nothing left if they got you. Would be cool to actually see this crocodile in the flesh one day, though. Fine, Spino. This crocodile sometimes will jump and catch food like the American alligator does. It is seen as the most aggressive of all New World crocodiles. It also exhibits highly intelligent behavior, far more than so is typical for crocodiles. Aggressive and smart. This thing is like the Indoraptor of crocodiles. Mating season is between May and July, and I'm sure they get even more testy in those months. They lay up to 40 eggs, which incubate for 58 to 70 days. Hatching usually then occurs in August to September. At birth, newborn Cuban crocodiles are only 3 inches long. Sadly, this crocodile is critically endangered, as I've said throughout this section, and the fact that this fascinating and gorgeous animal is one reason I wanted to talk about it, teach about it, and just tell more people about it. Yep. In some places, it has been sadly hunted to near extinction, but there is hope to this ancient crocodile's story. Intense research is being done to study and save active wild populations, and it is also being saved through captive breeding programs in Europe, the United States, and in India. The pure gene pool of this animal itself is also threatened, though, due to hybridizations with the American crocodile having occurred in the past. 2 Cuban crocodiles named Castro and Hillary, which were owned by Fidel Castro, currently reside in the Skansen Aquarium in Sweden, where they have been since 1981, and they have successfully produced many new young crocodile specimens since then. And one of the 2 was actually involved in a serious attack on a human in 2019. The man did survive, though. Overall, though they are in a tight spot right now, especially in the wild, I'm optimistic about the future of the Cuban crocodile. I don't think we'll be saying goodbye to this little trooper, to this survivor of the Pleistocene, just yet. And hopefully not anytime remotely in the near future either. Now, the next and final one of this video is actually not a crocodile, so we saved it for the end, but it is a Pleistocene terror still worth talking about, plus it's a close relative, so it's not terribly far from the video topic. Let's get to it. Alligator hailensis is an extinct genus of large alligator from the Pleistocene period that lived in Florida, named after the town its fossils were discovered in. It is a transitional fossil, a middleman, or middle gator, between the modern American alligator and the older alligator Mephirdii. The fossils of this gator were first found in fossil assemblages gathered in the remains of ancient water-filled sinkholes, something you still find all over Florida today. It was only named recently too, also in that cursed year of 2020. This was a big alligator. It got up to the same size of the biggest modern American alligators. You know those ones you always see on the news strolling across a golf course? Yeah, think those for a little context there. The fossilized holotype skull was almost 21 inches long from the tip of the snoot to the end of the parietal bones, which are the bones that form the roof of the cranium. It was also measured to be just under 8 inches wide across the top jaw. It is very possible that the skull alone of this animal could have gotten as big as 28 inches long, which, when compared to skull sizes relative to body length that we see in modern American alligators, would mean that this gator could grow to be at least 17.5 feet long, if not bigger. This Pleistocene alligator had 5 premaxillary teeth and 16 maxillary teeth. This gator first began stalking the waterways and swamps of Florida, armed with and using those teeth on prey in the early Pleistocene. The extant American alligator likewise appears in the middle Pleistocene. Like its modern relative, this gator's range was largely contained to the southeastern United States. The diet of this animal, though, is not particularly clear, and I wouldn't walk up to one and ask it about its meal habits, even if they were still around. But we do know that fish made up part of this animal's diet due to fish fossils being found with fossil bones of this alligator. If you look at the proposed family tree of alligators, hailensis descends from Mephirdii, which descended from thorbjarnarsoni, which is a gator with not much info on it beyond that it lived mostly in Nebraska during the early Miocene period. And that was just a few of the scary and the weird Pleistocene crocodiles, from the extinct to one that is still hanging on today. I really hope you enjoyed this topic. I think the Pleistocene is way more interesting than a lot of people give it credit for. It really tends to get overlooked. And, I'm guilty of that too. I used to only ever think about the Mesozoic and even the Paleozoic. For a long time, the Cenozoic and the Pleistocene just never interested me, but I'm really getting into it nowadays. If you did enjoy and you want to see more paleo topics, please like and subscribe so that I know you want to see more like this, and it also helps me grow. I want to cover a few paleo topics in December as well, from Atoya, the creepy Cambrian marine worm, to the terrifying shark-like Adestus. And later this month, I'll be covering a really obscure dinosaur too, so stay tuned for that. Let me know also what paleo topics you'd like to see covered in the future, if you'd like a volume 2 of this video, and which of these crocodiles was your favorite. Mine was the Cuban crocodile. Spino, you're being really unprofessional. You know that? That's going to do it for this video, everybody. So, I just want to say again that I hope you stick around for those future topics. Please suggest paleo topics you want to see covered. If you like prehistoric crocodiles, then please check out the video linked in the description about Anatosuchus and several others from throughout prehistory. And the most important thing for me to say, thank you for watching.